A new poll reveals that almost half of Tory councillors think that Rishi Sunak's government is too left-wing. A Savanta survey found that 47% believed that the Conservative Party under the PM's leadership has headed leftwards politically and no longer reflects true Conservative values. Now, writing exclusively for the GB News website, the Conservative MP for Shipley, Philip Davies, defends his party and argues that Rishi Sunak is the most right-wing Prime Minister since Margaret Thatcher. Well, he made quite a splash with that article. Do check it out on our website. I'm delighted to say that Philip Davies joins me now. Philip, good to see you again. Wokery in our public institutions, high taxes, high immigration, high inflation. Sounds like a pretty left-wing government to me.
Yeah, they're all things, Mark, that Rishi Sunak inherited when he became Prime Minister. They're not things that he created. I think even Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is one of Boris Johnson's greatest supporters, admitted that the immigration figures that we saw, the 2 years, over 600,000 net immigration, they were Boris Johnson's immigration figures. They weren't Rishi Sunak's. And Rishi Sunak has actually got to work and changed the immigration rules. He's made sure that, for example, you have to earn more now before you're allowed to come into the country, or you're allowed to sponsor somebody to come into the country. He's changed the rules to stop dependents coming into the country. In fact, I've had a letter from my local university at Bradford University saying it's absolutely terrible what Rishi Sunak's done to immigration because it's going to really damage our income from foreign students as a result. So Rishi Sunak has actually improve the situation on legal immigration. He's passed through the House of Commons the Rwanda bill, which makes clear on the front of it it does not comply with the European Convention of Human Rights, which is something I think that people were crying out for the government to do, not to just stick to the European Convention of Human Rights. We've started cutting taxes too slowly, in my opinion, but nevertheless, we've started cutting taxes. He's pushed back the ridiculous rush to net zero. Boris was a net zero fanatic, of course, and insisted that we all got to, we banned all the petrol and diesel cars by 2030 and oil and gas boilers by 2030. Rishi, thankfully, has pushed that back. I'd like that to go further, but at least he's moving in the right direction. He's scrapped the white elephant of HS2, which was absolutely ridiculous. In the past, he's cut our foreign aid budget. I mean, all of these things, whether people think they go far enough or not, surely everyone has to accept they're all moving in the right direction, and we're in a far better and more conservative position now than the situation he inherited when he became Prime Minister.
Well, Philip, I'm a self-confessed Sunak Spartan, and I think he's a good Prime Minister. But I'm on my own on that one, aren't I? Why are so many of my viewers and listeners watching and listening to this show tonight flocking to Reform UK, presumably because they are offering a more traditionally conservative set of policies?
Well, I think the one issue in the room is immigration, and particularly, both legal and illegal immigration. That's the one big issue that's driving people to reform. I don't think many people know that Rishi Sunak's changed the rules so that 300,000 fewer people a year will be allowed to come into the country as a result of the changes he's made. I don't think he's done a very good job at communicating that. And of course, we still need to go further. That still leaves immigration too high, but it's a very good start. And we need to see the Rwanda policy come into fruition, which people are very, very frustrated that it hasn't, me included, I might add. So people have got to see that those things will work, and that's why people are sort of out of frustration supporting reform. But look, there's two ways to ensure that Keir Starmer wins a massive majority at the general election. One's to vote Labour and one's to vote Reform. So it seems to me if you don't think the Conservative government's being conservative enough, it seems very strange to me that the solution to that problem is to elect Keir Starmer with a 200-seat majority. That seems to be a strange reaction to having a government that you don't think is conservative enough.
Let's bring in, if we can, Philip, my brilliant pundits tonight. Stay where you are. We've got former advisor to the aforementioned Boris Johnson, political communicator Lord Coolvere Ranger, journalist and communications advisor Linda Jubilee, and author and campaigner for Children in Care, Chris Wilde. Linda, why do you think these councillors have decided that their own party isn't Conservative anymore?
Well, because that's what they believe.
Are they right?
And because they go out into their areas and they talk to people and they're being told something. Remember that councillors, with all due respect to Phil, who's an MP I like and admire, councillors are actually out on the ground talking to people, and these councillors are listening to what they're being told. I remember Danny Finkelstein once saying in the Times years ago, the voter's always right, a bit like the customer. In fact, you have to pay attention to what they're saying, and if they believe something, work it out.
Chris, what do you think's happening inside the Tory party?
I just think, for me, they're the most right they've ever been since I've got into politics over the last few years. But I think anything moderate or central right looks left to them. And I think about left-wing politics, people think it's soft politics. It really isn't. And a good point to make as well is that I think that the Conservatives are afraid of Reform UK. So they're just doing everything they can to win votes at the moment. So that's what's happening.
Kulveer, where do we go from here? This is a major headache for Rishi Sunak, isn't it?
It's a major headache, but it's an interesting poll, which I believe is paid for by Labour Together as well. So it's interesting who wants to know this information. Because if you've got a party that's struggling overall in the polls and has been for a while, and of course is facing some challenges in the locals that are coming up, you will have disaffected councillors. But as Chris just said, you know, this Conservative government is probably further to the right than it has been in the last 14 years as a political movement. It's cracking down on immigration. It's cracking down on law and order. It's looking to cut taxes. It's looking to get away with, get rid of national insurance. It's trying to generate economic growth. It's doing everything in its power, having suffered the challenges and the macro global shocks to the economy of COVID and the war in Ukraine. So it's really trying to get that Conservative engine going. And yes, the government is struggling to do it. It's combating all the different forces that are working against it, including the issue that it needs to get its message across. And I think that's where the Prime Minister has his biggest challenge, because the small boats, the cutting the waiting lists, all of these things are his plan, and he needs to do those things, but he needs to show Conservative values and beliefs doing it.
Briefly, Philip, if there is such a hunger out there for true conservatism, why are the British public about to elect a Labour government?
Well, we'll see if they do or not, but I think it's born out of frustration. I don't meet anybody on the streets who's enthusiastic about Keir Starmer or Angela Rayner or a Labour government. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. They're frustrated about the Conservative Party, and there's no doubt that since 2019, we haven't been conservative enough for many of the reasons that Kulveer mentioned, like, for example, COVID, where we had socialism in action through the lockdowns. But I don't actually think people are looking to the Labour Party. They just are frustrated with the Conservatives, and they want a reason to vote for us. But Conservative MPs and Conservative activists have got to get behind the Prime Minister and tell people what he's doing, rather than complaining about it. Actually tell people all the good things he's doing.
Philip, a great article in the GB News website. Thank you so much for joining us. Send our best to Esther, and we'll catch up soon. My thanks there to Philip Davies, MP.